Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Dr. Maggie Ray, an academic and ADHD coach and founder of Creating Positive Futures, a small group of dedicated coaches who are on a mission to help high school and college students earn better grades with less stress by developing the time management, organization, and study skills they need to thrive. A huge part of the stress that so many students and families experience is the college process, which is why I love hosting this Your Teen Ready for College interview series to share strategies with you all that you can use to approach this college process in a way that's less stressful, more successful for you and your teens, and to connect you all with some of the experts in the field who are doing really great work and who can help streamline that process for you. So I'm really excited to be here today with my friend and colleague, Shirag Shemmassian, who's going to be talking with us about the pros and cons of applying early and how to decide if that's a good fit for your teen. So Dr. Shemmassian is a college admissions expert who's helped hundreds of students get into top schools like Princeton and MIT, and he's also a former Cornell admissions interviewer. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
I'd love to share with our viewers here a little bit more about your story and your background and how you got into doing the work that you do. If you could let us know a little bit more about that, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So I went to a tiny high school in Los Angeles. It's been some time now. I graduated in 2004, and when I was applying to college, there wasn't very good college counseling support. So it was like there was information about local schools, but not much beyond that. And so I wanted to attend school in a different place and, maybe do something different than what a lot of my peers were doing or what graduates of my school had historically done in terms of where to attend college. So I ended up applying and I decided to attend Cornell, and I was able to get a lot of scholarships to fund my education as well. And along the way, people were asking for a lot of help. Help me get into this school or help me get this scholarship. And so I was doing that, and word of mouth was sort of organically growing from there. And I ended up going to UCLA for my PhD in clinical psychology. And that's also a very selective program, continued to get fellowships and things like that. So folks just came to me, they were being successful. And I love doing this work. I'm sort of an admissions nerd, and I decided several years ago to support students with getting into top colleges, as I had done for myself and helped my friends do for many years. So I've been working in admissions to some degree for over 15 years, and our students have had pretty tremendous success over that span.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for being here with us, because that's quite a wealth of expertise to draw from. So yeah. I'm excited to talk with you a little bit today about an issue that I find a lot of students are stressed about when it comes to, especially these top colleges that you mentioned, trying to get into those colleges. There's this question of, okay, well, should I be trying to improve my chances by applying early? There are a whole host of different kinds of applying early, right? There's early decision, there's early action, there's multiple different, early decision 1 versus 2, and it gets very overwhelming. So I'd love to learn a little bit more from you. I mean, first of all, just kind of the basics of what is early versus regular decision, maybe for some students who aren't super aware of all the different distinctions out there, and what those different kinds are, and how that impacts students' timelines.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So first I'll provide an overview on what early and regular application cycles are, and then go into the various permutations of early applications and whatnot, and how that impacts admission. So there's early application deadlines and there are regular application deadlines. Regular application deadlines tend to be around mid-December to mid-January. A lot of them cluster around early January, and this is what people historically have thought of as like the college application deadlines. But then there are early deadlines. So these can happen, September, October, November. A lot of them are at the beginning of November. Some can be in October. And this just allows students to submit their materials early and to find out sooner. So typically, like a private school will, or some public schools as well, allow you to submit your applications on November 1, so you can hear back by December 15 or something like that. And then if you have your answers, you celebrate and you can be done, or you can still wait on regular decision schools. So regular decision applications, you would submit in early January typically, and you would hear sometime in March or even early April. And so there's a lot more time where you have to spend wondering, what your options are going to be. So from a time standpoint, it's very attractive to families to have some sense of, okay, am I going to get admitted somewhere? Where are those places going to be? I can start considering financial aid offers early. I can even space out the work. So if I do some applications early and some applications regular, it's not like I have all of my to-dos bunched up on one date. So I think psychologically it helps people spread out their work. Now, that's the overview of the timelines, but there are critical details to know to decide whether or not to apply early. So there are two, I guess, historically types of early applications. One is early decision, the other is early action. They differ based on whether or not they're binding. Meaning, if you apply to a school early decision, it means that if you get in, you have to attend there. You're basically telling the school, if I get in, I'm going to attend there. Whereas with early action, it's not binding. You're telling a school, I want to find out early if I'm going to get in. Schools love early decision applications because it tells them, it's very predictable for them how many students they can admit for sure and who will enroll into their incoming class, right? So let's say, for instance, 1,000 people apply early decision. It's a binding process. The school accepts 400. They know that they have 400 in the books. And that way they can plan out the rest of their regular decision class, right? They can see who to accept from the regular decision pool. And then that way they can have the type of class they're looking for with regards to diversity and anything else that they're interested in. Now, in recent years, there has been a trend, especially among the most prestigious schools, to move towards something called single choice early action, otherwise known as restrictive early action. So there was some backlash against early decision because, this binding nature, students were getting in and they were realizing I still can't afford to pay for the school. I thought I was going to get more financial aid. And so there was a pretty well-known way to get out of the binding status of early decision, which was tell the school, I can't afford this, please release me from the bind. And schools would do that. But now colleges have moved to this single choice early action or restrictive early action, which means any school that has that, you can only apply to one of them via single choice or restrictive early action. And you're still telling the school, look, of the 8 schools that I'm applying to, or the 5 schools I'm applying to, you guys are the ones that I'm giving this single choice ticket to, because this is where I want to attend the most, and I want to hear back early and all that. And although it's not binding, schools have a sense of, okay, if the student is applying via restrictive or single choice early action, they're more likely to come here. And we can still predict how many folks are going to come to our school and, via the early decision pool, and then we can fill out the rest of the class from the regular decision pool.
Okay, so I'm starting to see the spectrum of all these different options that you could have. And I've also even heard of there's early decision, typical that you just talked about. I've heard of an early decision too. That's like you're not actually, is that a thing where you're not applying early in October, November? You're kind of still applying binding, but you're applying binding at kind of the normal timeline, like January, December.
Yes.
Is that an option that is equally beneficial for the colleges? It seems like it loses a lot of the benefits for them of knowing their class early. So why would colleges want to do that?
Well, anytime it's binding, it benefits the college, because then they can predict, okay, they can say, this many students, I'm going to take this percentage, and I know those students are going to come here. So like University of Chicago is one example that has an early decision 1 and an early decision 2. So take, for instance, a student who applies early decision or single choice early action, and they don't get in. So they find out, in early to mid-December that they don't get in, and they say, that's a bummer, but now I have this opportunity to apply early decision again to another school. And so you may submit that early decision application to the other school that allows early decision too. And then that way you can take advantage of that preferred application review without, using up that binding or single choice ticket on your maybe second choice school or third choice school, whatever that ED2 school may be for you.
Mm-hmm. So for a given school, is it typically going to offer only one of these things? Because I'm imagining there's so many different options, right? So would a school say have early decision and early action and early decision two and single choice? Or like, are they going to all do all of these things, or do you really have to research your schools you're thinking about and see what options they even have available?
Yeah, it depends on the school. So it's highly variable. There's no, schools aren't bound to any of these. So, some schools can have early decision, other schools can have non-binding early action only, others can have single choice early action or early action. I mean, like, schools can really do anything they want with this stuff. It's not like there's a governing body that tells them you must do X or you must do Y. So I think they're also playing around with it. Part of the reason why this has become more and more attractive to schools over the year, well, I guess there are multiple layers to it. Number one is yield rates, right? So the number of accepted students who choose to enroll in the school, that percentage is otherwise known as the yield rate. The higher a school's yield rate, the more positively it impacts their ranking. So yield rate is one of the factors that goes into university ranking. So let's say a school admits 40% of their class or 50% of their class via single choice early action or early decision. That's a really nice yield rate because, and you can, half of your class enrolled at 100% rate. So now you just have to make sure that of the remaining pool, a high enough number, and then you can have one of the highest yield rates, and that's very attractive from a ranking profile. It just shows that it's a desirable school, right? Also, because applying to colleges I'm saying logistically speaking, applying to colleges has become easier. You just click a bunch of boxes and you might be able to modify certain essays and apply to more schools. So students are applying to more places on average. And that's why it's harder for some colleges, even elite ones, to predict how many people will attend their school each year. So then it offers them some certainty, because colleges also don't want to have a situation where they have a bunch of empty seats. So colleges always over-admit because they know that not every student will, enroll in their program. But if students are applying to a bunch of places and getting into maybe more places than they historically did, now it's harder to predict how much to over-enroll and so on. So it just gives them some sense of where they stand in any given year by beefing up that early application pool.
That makes a lot of sense in terms of the trends that are at work here and why colleges are gravitating towards this option and why it's becoming more and more emphasized by the schools, for sure. So it sounds like for students, they're kind of facing two decisions. They're facing the decision about, do I apply early timeline or regular timeline? And then they're also kind of facing this decision of, do I apply binding with a decision, kind of an early decision, 1 or 2, or do I apply non-binding with like an early action? I guess single choice early action would, I guess, also not really be binding. That's affecting your timeline. So it's kind of a timeline decision, and it's a decision. Do I want to commit to a single school choice? So how do you help students navigate those two decisions about how early to apply and also about whether to commit to a school or not?
Yeah, so the whether to commit to a school or not, I think really only comes into play when there's an early decision question. So if there's an early decision question, I tell students and parents, only use this option if you are certain this is your top choice and you won't wonder what if about the other schools on your list. Like sometimes we have students who'll say, I've wanted to go to this school my whole life. This is my dream. I don't care. Like, if I found out about this and didn't even find out about the others, that's totally fine by me. That's the dream when you're thinking about early decision. If you hear something like that, it's a no-brainer. Now, if you're applying to a number of schools that have single choice early action, I should just say off the bat, if it's a question of should I apply single choice early action or not apply to any schools via single choice early action, my answer is you should always apply to schools to the school single choice early action to take advantage of the admission benefit. So one thing we haven't talked about yet is if you apply, the more restrictive the admissions processes, whether it's early decision or single choice early action, the more likely you are to get into that school via that route. In other words, if you apply early decision or single choice early action, your admissions odds are considerably higher at that school versus applying to that school regular decision. So one example from this past cycle was, I believe, Harvard, which had an overall acceptance rate of, I believe, 4.5%, somewhere around there.
Wow.
They're very low. Their restrictive early action pool, I think, got in at a 13.5% rate, and they filled around 50% of their class that way. So if you do the math, the regular decision admission rate was much lower than that 4.5%. I haven't done the math myself, but it's probably going to be somewhere even below 2%, right? So that's incredibly difficult. So if you're a student who's really set on going to a specific school and you have the option of applying single choice early action, it's not binding, so there's no real risk. But you have incredible upside with regard to boosting your admissions odds. Now, 13.5% still isn't high, but it's much better than that 2% number, right? And this applies to schools like Stanford and other Ivy Leagues and other prestigious colleges as well. So that's I treat that decision a little bit different than the early decision. If early decision, none of the schools you're interested in offer that, and a number of them offer single choice early action, you should definitely apply to one of the schools' single choice early action.
Now, if you do that, you can only apply to one single choice early action. Does it also mean you can't apply to any that have non-single choice early action? Can you do those as well, or do you have to say I'm submitting no other applications?
You can. So you can apply to a school that has a restrictive early action. You can also apply to other schools that have non-restrictive early action. That just puts you on an earlier timeline. And the decision of whether or not to do that really depends on, do you have your ducks in a row, right? Have you been working on your applications early? Are you ahead of the game? Because what you never want to do is rush low quality materials. In other words, if you're applying non-binding or non-restrictive early action, then the only real benefit is you find out early, which is a non-trivial benefit, but it's not going to give you this significant boost in admissions odds or anything like that. So
So there's not a significant advantage for early action when you're talking non-binding. It sounds like there's not any significant advantage in terms of your admissions chances.
Yeah, it's certainly, and if there is, it's certainly nowhere near the single choice or the early decision types of admissions odds. It's really more about timeline. It gives a school a sense of how competitive their applicant pool is, how many people they've admitted, and things like that. So a touch different, but nothing substantial. But let's say you're at it's 1 week out and your essays really aren't that good. It probably behooves you to wait until the regular decision deadline and make sure that all of your application materials are top notch and submit that way. Because I'd rather a student, if there's no additional admissions boost involved and things like that, I'd rather have my student apply with 100% quality at the regular decision deadline versus say 70% at the non-restrictive early action deadline.
Right, that makes sense. Well, and one thing we talk a lot with our students about as well is grades, because we're often working with students who are really trying to improve their GPA and find better ways to study and get organized and plan ahead, hopefully for admissions timelines as well, and trying to help them think about, okay, do you need those senior fall grades? Because my understanding is you don't get to benefit from having great grades in your senior fall. If you're applying early, they're not going to see those grades when they're making their admissions decisions. So it's only based on up through spring of junior year. Is that correct?
Yeah. So if you're thinking about applying early, that means you're banking on your record up to that point. So all of your grades, your test scores, standardized test scores, all of that. Whereas if you apply regular decision, because you're submitting your application in like early January, that lines up really well with the end of fall semester of senior year. So let's say you had, I don't know, you had a semester somewhere where your grades aren't as good, or you want to use that extra semester to impress admissions committees. It might make sense to, to wait until the regular decision deadline, and then your counselor can also write that, midterm letter and provide your grades from that semester and so on, and that'll be taken into consideration. Now, whether or not you apply early or regular, you also have to maintain your grades during the second semester of freshman year, because all admissions decisions are conditional on you continuing to take classes at the same level of rigor and also to achieve at the same level. So if, let's say, you've taken AP tests and honors classes and all this kind of stuff up through junior year, and then senior year, you're in all the regular education classes, no challenging courses, colleges aren't going to like that. Nor are they going to like if you had, all A's and maybe a few B's, but then all of a sudden senior year, second semester, you get 2 C's. They can rescind their admissions decision. So senior year, regardless of when you apply to colleges, isn't supposed to be a cakewalk. It's not when you kick your feet up. You have to make that same level of challenge and achievement.
Well, and on the flip side, I was actually talking with a family recently, and they were thinking about course selection for the fall. And they were wondering, they're actually applying early, so schools are not going to see those grades necessarily when they're first applying. But they were wondering, are they going to look at the course selection? Are they going to be impressed by the fact that we're pushing ourselves to take these harder classes in our senior year of the fall semester? Or would they not really be taking that into account? So I was curious, does that impact your decision about which classes to take in your fall semester and how challenging those should be?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's not just a matter of impressing or not impressing, it's a matter of expectation. So if I'm a prestigious school and, I have my pick of students who are all high achieving across the country and across the world, it's not just like, oh, wow, they're taking, 3 AP courses in senior year. That's so impressive. No, there's an expectation that, if you're applying to our school, we're assuming that you're going to continue to challenge yourself and so on. So absolutely, it's not a time to take your foot off the gas, even as it pertains to taking a challenging course load. That's absolutely considered when making admissions decisions.
Okay, great. So are there any, I guess we talked kind of about the benefits of applying early. From a student standpoint, they could potentially have a better chance of getting in if they do a binding early decision. Or the single choice early action, that's also going to help with getting in. Potential drawback, I guess, is you don't have as much time to get your application ready. You might not get to benefit from that boost in your GPA. What about the financial part? So financial aid awards, when are students finding out about that? How does that impact your decision about whether to apply early or regular?
Yeah, so if you get in early, you'll find out about financial aid early. That's the case at most schools, whereas if you apply regular decision, you'll find out about financial aid later. So and this is, again, part of the reason, at least what schools say in terms of why early applications are also attractive. You can get a sense of, what you're going to get. And so let's say you apply to a few schools early and you get into one or more of your top schools and they provide generous aid, that's really comforting. You're not going to have to think for 3 or 4 more months of what schools are going to give you. Whereas with regular decision, you're sort of at the whim, right? So initially there's a celebration. Oh my gosh, I got in, and students and parents alike are excited. And then of course, typically the parents are like, wait, how much are we going to have to pay for this, right? And so just having a good sense of what you're going to be on the hook for is really nice, because then you can plan ahead, whether it's maybe adding a few more regular decision schools at the last minute to see if there are some places you'll get in where you'll get more financial aid, or maybe say, oh, we got in and, you're working on these essays, even though you have 2 more weeks, we're all set because you got into your dream school and they're providing good enough aid. It's like I said, if you can submit your materials with high quality by the early deadline, I typically encourage students to, or you can do half-half, depending on your school list and everything you have going on in your life. But it's nice, generally speaking, to apply and find out early.
Okay. So I know you had mentioned earlier, if you get into a school early decision, but then they come back with a financial aid offer that is not sufficient, you can get off the hook by saying, oh, well, we just can't afford that. Um, so because I was thinking of the finances as a potential risk. For example, you wouldn't want to apply early decision because then you're saying I'm committing to go to the school, and what if they don't give you enough financial aid, and then you're on the hook for paying for it? It sounds like that's actually not a big concern.
Well, schools aren't advertising what I'm telling you right
okay.
now. So it's not like schools are saying it's binding unless you call us and you say that you can't afford this. They don't say
Okay.
it's binding. And then they'll send you the letter, and then it's up to you to know this loophole. That you reach out, you say I simply can't afford this, and then at that point they'll typically release. You might have one or two back and forths, but I've never encountered a situation where a student who really wanted to get out of it couldn't get out of it or something like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so they're not going to have some sort of black mark on their record, or that's not going to impact other schools' willingness to accept them or anything like that.
I've never observed something like that.
Okay. Do you find that it has any impact on the amount of aid a school is going to provide a student, either from a need perspective or a merit perspective, if they apply early versus regular decision?
So I haven't observed any trend like that. One place is, one place of concern potentially. I haven't seen schools behave this way, but I suppose it is possible where they're less likely to give you merit-based aid if it's binding because you're bound to go there anyway. It's possible. I don't know how much schools are doing that, but typically, like in terms of need-based calculations, they'll give you what they were going to give you, whether you applied early or regular and things like that. And also if you get in early, you can also have more back and forth about your financial situation and potentially negotiate more aid and things like that. So you might be able to use the tax return from the upcoming year and still have time to negotiate those offers and things like that. But yeah, typically like schools, what they'll do is they have calculators, where they plug in various numbers from, your FAFSA and what have you, and they'll come out with the number of, how much money they're going to give you in grants, how much loan you're eligible for, how much you're expected to contribute out of pocket, and so on.
Okay, so that's good to know that it's not going to have a too big of an impact there. So I was curious if you could kind of maybe wrap all of what we've been saying up into a summary of the kind of kid who would be great to apply early decision and or single choice early action. I'm just kind of a description of a kid who would come into your office and say, here's my scenario. And you would say, oh, absolutely, early is the thing for you to do, versus the kid where you would say, I don't think early would be the best choice for you. I'd really recommend waiting.
Yeah. So a student who's sort of a lock for early decision, and I'm speaking under the assumption that one of the schools on their list actually offers early decision. Again, right. Among the most prestigious schools, the trend is moving away from early decision and toward the single choice early action thing. So let's say like a lot of Ivy League schools are doing this, Stanford's doing this, where it's just like the single choice early action or regular. But let's say there's a scenario where there is a binding option, which we can sort of treat. Actually, yeah. So there's the binding option. The student that's a no-brainer for that is, look, I know I've toured schools. I know about schools. I know my clear first choice, and I'm not going to think twice about the other schools. I'm not going to have any buyer's remorse or things like that. If they're speaking like that, and especially on top of that, the parents are not concerned about their ability to pay for that school, that's a pretty clear, choice for them. Single choice early action. So this is a situation where their dream school is single choice early action. And they're wondering, should I apply to this school single choice early action versus other schools early action? You should really choose the school where you really want to go, but that you also have a realistic chance of getting into. So there's always a question to Maggie with the early decision or single choice early action, because you can use that on one school. Parents often come to me and they say, okay, my students has a good GPA. They don't have the highest GPA. They have a great standardized test score. It's not the best standardized test score. And so do we use up this option on the like shoot for the stars dream school, where we have maybe slightly lower odds at, but that's, we want to do anything we can to maximize our odds? Or do we shoot for the somewhat more realistic one based on our numbers, because we don't want to miss out on using that ticket for that school?
It's a great question.
Yeah, and so that's a tough situation. So let's say, for instance, a student is looking at Stanford or Cornell, where Cornell's average matriculating student still has very high numbers, but not as high as, say, Stanford. So, and Stanford's admissions rates is lower than Cornell. So the question is, like, do I use this on Stanford, where it's much harder to get into, but I want to make my chances as high as possible, or do I use it for the school where I think I can get in, and any bump in admissions odds will be a nice boon? The question, that's a philosophical type of question, because I always ask students, are you the type of person who, if, let's say, you got into Cornell in that situation, not to denigrate Cornell, I went there, I love Cornell, but if you got into Cornell, would you always wonder what if about the Stanford, like, what if I had done Stanford and gotten in? And some students, wouldn't be able to live with that thought, or, that sense of regret or what if. And then, in that case, they might want to really go big and never wonder, realizing the risk of not using their sort of single choice ticket at the school where, they had a stronger shot of getting into. Now, if they get into that pie in the sky, or like, the true dream school, then great, this is all, we're all celebrating, doesn't matter. But if they don't get in, and let's say they don't get in then to Cornell too via regular, are they gonna regret that decision? So that's really tough. And I guess my role in all of this is just being candid with families about what I think their odds are of getting into various schools, and just saying, okay, are you the type of person who's going to worry about this more or worry about that more when it's all said and done? And it's a conversation. And as long as, students are aware of the risks and the benefits, and they can make an informed decision, then I'm good with that. But if a student has, again, based on their data, no realistic shot of getting into that true dream school, I'll say that as well. At the end of the day, it's their decision to make.
That makes sense. Well, and that's kind of admissions all across the board, and you're ultimately never going to have any guarantee of getting in anywhere, and it's all a game of trade-offs and cost-benefit decisions and potential missed opportunities if you do this versus that, or if you accept this offer versus this other offer, if you've got multiple ones on the table. So it is hard. It's the biggest decision that a student is ever going to have to make up to this point in their life, and so it's tough for a lot of kids, but it sounds like having that advice to help at least think through the process would be really useful. So let's say they've done that. They've thought through the process. They've decided, okay, I am going to apply early, or I am going to apply regular decision. How does that shift their timeline of what they want to be doing when, in terms of their essays, in terms of the rest of their application?
Yeah, we encourage students to begin their essays really during the summer. Writing very good ones takes time to brainstorm, time to pre-write, time to change and whatnot. And some students haven't made this decision of, what their real top choice is until like the start of the fall of their senior year. So they're still doing visits, and they're keeping in touch with admissions committees and things like that. But our goal at that point, in the summer, is to begin on their personal statement, which is, or otherwise known as like the Common App essay, assuming you're applying to private schools. And that's the essay that will go everywhere. So you're going to have to write it anyway. And it's not contingent on which schools you apply to. Like, you're not going to change the essay based on that. And so you want to work on that. You want to work on your activity section. You want to request your rec letter, right? Your rec letters, because the sooner they know, the better. Teachers, counselors get bombarded with these types of requests. So they really, really appreciate early requests, and just giving them a sense of, hey, I anticipate, or I intend to apply early. I just want to give you a heads up. That type of thing is very useful. And then, when you have a sense of what school you're going to apply to via single choice early action, or early decision, or early action, then you can look up their supplemental essays, which are the school specific essays, and you can put on a spreadsheet or somewhere else all the different things you have to write, and then work backwards and see, okay, how much runway do I need? But I typically recommend let's say you're going to apply to 5 schools early. It would be wise to begin writing those supplementals at least 2 months out, just to give yourself enough time to brainstorm, to write, to get feedback, to rewrite, to do all of those things. Make sure that you're keeping up with your rec letter writers, checking in about how their letters are going, to send them your essays because you might want them to corroborate what you're saying about yourself. When they write their letters, right? It's one thing if I say I'm amazing to a school, but it's another thing if my rec letter writer tells the school that I'm amazing, right? Because the thought is that there's less, obviously, bias and things like that. So it's just, you want to make sure to begin working on your apps at least 4 months out. That's the ideal scenario, just to give yourself enough time for everything.
That's a great idea. Well, and what would you recommend to a student who maybe has decided they're going to do something early, and it's ideally going to be their school? It's their dream school. They want to get in, but they also have a lot of these applications they're going to be doing on a regular timeline. But maybe they are just doing one early school and they don't want to necessarily work on 15 different supplements for these regular schools. Can they wait, or do they really need to kind of be assuming they're going to get turned down and just acting as if they have to do all their applications anyway? Because I am curious about that, because I think a lot of students would have the temptation to feel like, well, I applied early and I don't want to waste all this effort to work on these other schools if I don't need to.
Yes. So the short answer is do not wait to find out about your early application decisions before working on your regular decision application. So going back to that timeline, Maggie, let's say you submit your early application on that November 1 date, and you're going to find out on or around December 15, but your regular decision applications are due January 1 or January 2. Suppose you don't get into the 1 school you applied to or the 3 schools you applied to early, and now it's December 15. You now only have 2 weeks around the holidays to write all of your materials. That's really, really rough. Do not, if you're a student or parent listening, do not wait on that. So not assume you're not going to get in, but it's almost like compartmentalize, like set aside that you've applied early and just lock in on that regular decision date and work on your applications as you would have. Believe me, if you get into the schools you wanted to get into early, you're not going to care that you put in the effort. You're not going to be upset, like, I got into Stanford, but dang it, like, I shouldn't have
spent all this time, right?
No one ever has had that thought, right? Like, no one has been angry at that point. Everyone's celebratory, right?
Right.
So,
they're mad when they're working on it. Oh, what if this is a waste of effort? Right. But I like your idea about just compartmentalize, almost pretend that didn't even happen, or it's just irrelevant at this moment. I'm going to just move on. Early ones are submitted. I'm going to move on, and now I'm going to focus on my regular decision ones, because I'm imagining that stressed out scenario that you talked about, where you find out mid-December and then you've got to work on all those applications in that 2 weeks of holiday break. That is the last thing you want to spend your holiday break doing. That sounds horrendous.
Yeah. So imagine now finding out that you didn't get into Stanford or whatever. Not only are you upset about that, but now you have 2 weeks around the holidays. That's the worst case. So you're going to regret that much more than, working on something for no reason, if you end up getting into your dream school, right? So I strongly encourage students to work as though, they have to meet those regular deadlines. And then there's a subset of students who are, applying to University of California schools that have a end of November application deadline. And since they won't find out about their early school prior to that deadline, it's sort of a moot point because they have to work on the UC applications anyway. So there are a lot of variables, and you have to be super aware of the various application deadlines so you can plan accordingly.
That completely makes sense. So you just kind of think about the process as a whole. Don't segregate it, and don't apply early because you think that that's going to save you the effort of applying regular, because you need to put that effort in either way.
Yes. Unless every school on your
really
list.
Good to know.
Yeah. Unless every school on your list, allows an early application and you get them all in at that date, and then you don't have regular decision deadlines. But yes, for most students, what you just said is spot on.
Okay, great. Well, is there anything else that you think families should know or be aware of? Anything I should have asked that I didn't about early versus
No, I mean, I think we've covered, this has been a pretty dense conversation, and I think there's sort of a lot to digest with this, because it's not just a question of knowing, oh, like, these are the deadlines and whatnot, there's a lot of strategy to this. A few of the things we touched on, which is which school do you use your admissions boost on, and how does that impact your admissions odds and what have you. So there are a lot of considerations, but I guess I invite families to reach out with those questions so, they can make the most informed decisions for their family.
Definitely. And I know there's a lot more we didn't even get to touch on. One thing we started to talk a little bit about towards the end was how much time you want to put into your essays. And I know you also have a gift you wanted to share with our audience here about some more details on the essays. So anybody who's watching who wants to get access to that, there's a whole guide, which is really helpful about conquering college essays, and that step-by-step guide to help you get into your dream school that you have up on your website. We're going to put a link to that below this interview. So if you're watching and you're thinking, oh goodness, starting two months before or 4 months before for essays, wow, I was maybe thinking of essays the wrong way. I didn't realize they were that much work. You need to learn about the strategy for how to approach your essays. It is not an easy thing, and a thing I see a lot of students procrastinate on to their detriment, because these things take a lot of work. So definitely get that guide if you do not already. Go right below our interview right now, click the link and grab a copy. It will be really helpful. So thank you for providing that for our audience. I think that's going to be a really nice segue from this. Now, once you've made your decision, you've picked your schools, you know their topics, you can go ahead and start working on those as early as possible, so you're not stuck in a stressful situation there at the end like we were describing.
Right. Yeah, that's the worst case scenario.
Oh, absolutely. So anybody who's watching as well, I know we covered a lot today. So if you want to go back and watch parts of this interview again, if you want to share it with a friend, share it with your teen, share it with a family member, we will have the free replay available for 48 hours after this interview initially airs. And then, of course, you can always get access to all the interviews to keep forever as part of our Your Teen Ready for College Success package. So that is available on the website. It includes the videos, the audios, the recordings from all the interviews, bonus gifts from several of our speakers. I know we've talked about how you work with a lot of your students privately and give them customized, personalized advice. And there's special savings you can get on that program if you get the bonus as well. So the success package is normally $197, but it's $100 off during the interview series. So if you're watching this live during the interview series, you can get it for just $97, and it's all the interviews. Just that bonus we just mentioned is worth far more than that, hundreds of dollars more than that. So it's definitely a wonderful value, and you can just go to yourteenreadyforcollege.com/event to get a copy of that. So thanks so much again for joining us. This has been really helpful. I know I'm already thinking of several different families I want to share some of this information with just right off the top of my head. So thank you for giving us a great framework to think through what is a really important decision from an admission
my pleasure.
standpoint.
I thought it was valuable.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye, Maggie.
Bye.